that was the head of the team that was on the boat that night, on the Flying Tiger too, in June 8th to June 10th of 1963, that was the head of the assassination team. And there he is in Dealey Plaza on November 22nd of 1963, within seconds of the shots fired, with Grayson Lynch, his assistant, standing right next to him, tipping the hat like this just before the shots rang out. And David Morales, the chief shooter, was the one on the grassy knoll that actually fired the fatal shots that killed the president. And there he is in June of 1968, standing in the Ambassador Hotel, along with the guy who was the head of the Cuban student group that was the one that had the fight with Oswald on the street. So what you see has happened here is that this cabal that had been put together are the ones that killed the president. And it became critical later because, just as a kind of parenthetical aside, this is what the entire Watergate burglary was all about. Because it turns out that when President Nixon lost the election in 1960, as you know, he ran again in 1968 after Bobby was killed, that Bobby would have won the Democratic nomination, would have won the presidency, and they were terrified about Bobby Kennedy coming to office because you know perfectly well the first thing that Bobby Kennedy as the new president would have done was launch a full-scale investigation of the assassination of John. And so Bobby was killed in June of 1968. And with him being eliminated, Hubert Humphrey became the nominee and Richard Nixon beat him, and Richard Nixon became the president in 1968. But when Richard Nixon was running for re-election in 1972, he became terrified because right after he got the nomination in 1972 of June, it turns out the Democratic National Committee selected to be the head of the Democratic National Committee with their offices in the Watergate Hotel, Larry O'Brien. It turns out that Larry O'Brien was for 25 years the chief lobbyist in Washington, D.C. for Howard Hughes. And Nixon became terrified. He said, wait a second. All of a sudden, he's just all of a sudden quit being the Washington lobbyist for Howard Hughes after 25 years and has become the head of the Democratic National Committee that's organizing the campaign against me. What if he knows? What if he knows that I'm the one that got Howard Hughes to put together the assassination team, which is the team that actually killed the president? This is the only possible way I can lose the election. And so Nixon orders Jeb Magruder to send in the plumbers to wire up the telephones of Larry O'Brien in the Watergate Hotel. And when they got caught in the Watergate Hotel, you may remember, when the burglars got arrested and they were taken into custody, they found in the pocket of Bernard Barker a canceled check that was drawn on the Banco Internacional down in Mexico City from an account of a lawyer by the name of Ogario. That's the key to the whole thing. That's what the problem was, is that because they couldn't tell anybody else what it is they were looking for in the wiretaps, they had to send in actual people who were part of the S-Force. Those Cubans that were in the hotel in the burglary were part of the S-Force because they knew what they were looking for to determine whether he knew about the assassination team. And because of that, they paid them right out of the same account down in Mexico City in the Banco Internacional. And so that the famous smoking gun conversation that took place on June 23rd of 1972, after the burglars were arrested, you remember that John Dean, who was the legal counsel to President Nixon, and Bob Haldeman, his chief of staff, came into the president in the Oval Office, and it's on the tapes. And John Dean says, Mr. President, I think we've got a problem here. And Nixon says, what is that, John? And he said, well, just got a call from Pat Gray, who was the new head of the FBI, because Hoover had just died 2 weeks earlier. And Pat Gray says that they've been asked to investigate this bank down in Mexico City. This is right on the tapes. In this account where the check in Bernard Barker's pocket was cleared through. And Pat Gray wants to know whether that's going to cause any problem. There's a big long pause, and Richard Nixon says, John, I want you to go see Vernon Walters and Dick Helms over at the agency, the CIA. And I want you to have them contact the FBI and tell them to get the hell out of this investigation right now. There's a big long pause, and John Dean says, well, Mr. President, what am I supposed to tell him to say? And he said, you have Vernon Walters and Dick Helms tell the FBI that if they don't get out of this investigation right now, all the Mexico stuff about the Bay of Pigs guys could come out. That's the smoking gun conversation. That's the conversation for which Richard Nixon was impeached for obstructing justice by ordering the Central Intelligence Agency to shut down the investigation. And it was that next day, there was scheduled an FBI agent, the number 2 man in the office of the FBI, by the name of Mark Felt, who was Deep Throat, was assigned the next day. He was supposed to conduct the interview of the attorney by the name of Ogario down in Mexico City. And he was ordered by Vernon Walters and Dick Helms to stand down, and that's what caused him to reach out and contact Bob Woodward and to start to tell him the story about what was going on, to get rid of the president, to get him out of office. So this, and of course now you see that when Bobby had the chance of becoming president, they killed him and they killed John. But it wasn't the CIA that killed John Kennedy. It wasn't the FBI that killed John Kennedy. It wasn't, in fact, just the mafia that killed John Kennedy. It was something different than that. But it was a little bit of everything in there, because I've just told you exactly how the thing happened. And so you have to step back from that and you say, well, what is that? It wasn't the Pentagon killing him because they wanted to, because he was getting set to withdraw all the troops out of Vietnam, and it wasn't the Israeli Mossad that killed him because, Kennedy was going to be attacking Mossad, and, none of those things. This is how it happened exactly. And so you look at that complex development of how this whole thing happened. And it's a little bit like an automobile accident crash. People coming into an intersection and one person is running the orange light and the other person is picking something up off the floor, and they crash together and people get killed. What happened here is there was absolutely a conspiracy to kill Castro, and there became eventually a conspiracy to kill President Kennedy, but it was actually initiated by a low-level group of people in the S-Force who were rabid anti-Castro Cubans who will kill you for stepping on their dog's tail. These are the kind of people that they are. And so that they developed the desire to kill the president. When they killed him, the other people who realized who it was that had done it had all their own completely different reasons for being terrified about this ever being revealed, because it would look like the CIA killed the president, or it would look like Richard Nixon killed the president, neither one of which was true. So this is the nature of that conspiracy and what it actually looked like. And so what does that tell us? What does that tell us about how conspiracies really happen and how they don't happen? And what does that say to us about the present state of the cover-up conspiracy with regard to the UFO?